like to formally welcome Heilie, who will talk to us about a most interesting subject. Thank you, Heilie.
Thank you very much, Phil, and thank you, Pam, and everyone else logged in at this stage. I actually sort of prepared myself to say, you weet, goeiemiddag aan almal, but it's going the English route. So I'm just going to say welcome as well to sharing and actually listening to me this afternoon. And it's a privilege for me to spend this next hour with you. I've made it the topic invloed van die Hugenote en ander kulture op Suid-Afrikaanse kos. So the influence of the Huguenots and other cultures on South African food. And basically, when I started with this topic, it was quite interesting to me because I've done this presentation once, and I was also obviously on Hugenote. And, you know, if you really go into our food culture and where we are as a nation today, there is so many cultures that actually influenced our food, where we stand today, that let's start and let me share with you the contents of this presentation. As you can see there, I've divided it in 4. If you want to know a little bit more of where we stand as South Africans, you've got to go back to the global side. Wêreldkosgeskiedenis, we start with the global food history. Then I bring it back to South Africa, the food history on South Africa specifically. And then obviously I'm in cookery books, and I thought it very relevant to go then overview of South African cookery books, literature, and sources that's available. And then the origin and contribution of the food cuisines as we stand. So we basically, with the introduction, I've got a few slides there to show. And the written ones is some of our very original cookbooks. That the one at the middle is the very, very first cookbook that was ever written. It's a man that's written it. And then on the right one is the South African manuscripts. And then I've put that picture in of the pastels and natas. I mean, you've all seen it in Woolworths. We've seen these little custard tarts. So many people like it. And I brought that in because I'm going to refer back to this again. When I started with this whole presentation, as I said, I've done it before last year, end of last year. It was fascinating because I knew I was about to do the presentation a few months ahead. And as I started inquiring with foodies and all the food people that I know, from Peter Veldsmann, all the known food people, I ended up with someone that actually inspired me. And she basically said to me that she did a milk tart, her master's in milk tart. And she said to me she did it over 3 years. So this is Rachel Boerekos. I'm not sure if anyone knows and have heard of her, but Rachel Boerekos is a girl that had a restaurant in Pretoria, and I'm telling it because I found it very interesting. And it's like a coffee shop really that she had. And she had a lot of the ambassadors daar rond en die ambassadeurs en goed. And then they would come in and say, but what is your a best sort of in your coffee shop, what can you recommend? And she always said milk tart, and then she became so intrigued. She was an attorney that went into the food industry, that opened a coffee shop. And then she said she wanted to do her master's in the origin of milk tart. And it took her 3 years. The first 2 years was sort of, she handled the coffee shop and also did the study on her master's on this milk tart. And then the last year, the 3rd year, basically full time. And I said to her, it's impossible, the origin of milk tart. I mean, we all know it comes from Holland. It comes, Dutch. It's like the way I grew up. Milk tart comes from Holland, from my oma and great granny and whatever. So I read her whole master's thesis, and it was fascinating. Really fascinating. So I'm going to be sharing a little bit with you as I go on, but basically she inspired me a lot in the fact that, you don't assume something on food. You actually start digging further and further, and then, as I say, you actually discover quite a lot. And I said earlier as well, when to Phil, it's like a discovery in food that keeps on. We've never learned everything. It's also fashion. It changes, it grows, and it develops. So a little bit just on that, and we start then with the global food history, die wêreldkosgeskiedenis, because that is where Milktoad comes from somewhere. It didn't pop up in South Africa. It's not the Dutch people that brought Milktoad in. I'm taking that as an example the whole time. But we go in the food history. And as I went into things, I made it in these categories for myself. Ek het dit so gemaak, die wêreld deur die eeue. Ek het dit so opgedeel voor die 10de eeu, 10de tot 14de, en dan 15de tot 16de eeu, 7de tot die 19de, and from the 20th century onwards. So it's quite fascinating, because if you look back, how far back we really go. So voor die 10de eeu, I mean, so far back, a Roman book, The Art of Cooking, that was 4de tot die 5de eeu, was this book, The Art of Cooking. It was Acapius, and his name comes up in a lot of stuff in his original manuscripts, and it's quite fascinating if you go and actually read up about him as well. He did a lot of food stuff, and then he had a big banquet one day, and he poisoned himself. So he died of like food poisoning. It's quite interesting. From the 10de tot die 14de of that century, there is the Book of Dishes, Arabies, en dit was 'n skrywer van Baghdad. And note, it's all the men that started writing books first. And then the Forms of Cooking, that is 1319, an English book. And then we jump on to 15de eeu. So that was the origin of the first cooking books. And then as ons kyk na die 15de tot die 16de eeu, dit het bietjie meer begin wy raak, hulle het meer bestanddele begin gebruik, soos botter, eiergele en terte. En daar was ook die eerste handgeskrewe basis melktert resep. What am I doing here? Like, let me just go back. So die eerste handgeskrewe boeke en goed het daai tyd gekom. En ook daai botter, eiergele wat hulle gebruik het, vir my, as ek so na alles gekyk het in detail wat ek opgelees het, daar is al reeds die eerste melktert wat daai tyd begin ontwikkel het. En dit het basies alles in die European side ontwikkel daar, in die Europese mark, soos Portugal en al daai lande. As ek dit verder vat, want ek vat nou net so van hoogtepunte van daai tye wat vir my uitgestaan het, die 17de tot die 19de eeu, is daar dit bietjie meer beslaaie begin ontwikkel, en daar was die eerste koffiewinkel wat in Londen geopen het, en die boeke was meer gemik op huisvroue. So, as jy eintlik, ek het daar ingesit, die 1653, is die eerste boek deur 'n vrou geskryf. Dis eintlik dis nogal interessant, want daai, as jy vat van die 10de eeu na die 17de eeu, hoe lank het dit eintlik gevat vir vrouens om te begin to feature. It was always a man's world with all these slaves and all these men that wrote recipes. And it's quite interesting that 1653 was the first woman that actually wrote a book. And the book was written by her in 53, and it was only published 2 years later. So dan die 20ste eeu is alles meer gesofistikeerd begin raak. Dit is 'n supermarkte, wegneem etes, daar het ook gange. I don't know, almal wat Engels is, you will not understand the word gange, so it's courses, it's like a starter, a main and a dessert. It was all more sophisticated and focused on more fine dining as well, I would say. So, and basically, where am I now? 1514 was the first Dutch handwritten milk tart recipe that stood out in that time. So there's so much more to say in this period, but if I just let me just see with the 15 to 16, 15 tot die 16de eeu, daar waar hulle bottereier gegee het. Wat ek ook vergeet het om daar te noem is die sjokolades, die pineapple, die aartappels. Hulle het baie meer begin doen met die basiese bestanddele. So that all in all is looking at overall, there was a lot of development over a long time actually van die 10de eeu tot die 20ste eeu. Dit het soort van 'n stadige proses waar hulle met kos beweeg het. Ek gaan aan die volgende skuifie is die geskiedenis dan op spesifiek Suid-Afrikaanse kos. So as ons eintlik, ek sê altyd waar ons vandag is, ons moet weet waar ons vandaan gekom het. En ek vat weer die melktert as 'n voorbeeld, want ons kan sê die melktert is Suid-Afrikaans, maar ek het mos gesê dit het van iewers gekom. So as ons kyk where we are today, we have to go back in time. We started with world global, as I mentioned a few things just on the relevant about ingredients and about recipe books, and bringing it back to South Africa. We started 1652, toe die colonial settlement in Jan van Riebeeck gekom het. Basies het hulle hier aangekom. En daar was 'n paar dinge wat hulle natuurlik ontwikkel het, en veral hulle het gekom om die groentetuine, die kompaniektuin te ontwikkel. Maar daar was ook 'n paar dinge wat al reeds hier was, wat gevestig was. En van dit kan ons nou kyk is vrugte en groente. Soos ek sê, hulle het verder goed ontwikkel, maar daar was al reeds siering, stingel, wortel, daar was veldgroentes, hulle daai tipe goed begin gebruik, hulle die wortels geëet, daar was wilde asperges gewees, en dan velgroente wat basies kool is. Vrugtebome was eintlik baie suksesvol gewees. En in Jan van Riebeeck se tyd, dit is iets wat hulle het gekom om vrugtebome ook, hulle het dit ingevoer en hulle het baie suksesvol hier verder geneem. Wingerdstokkies is ook ingevoer en die Hannepoortdryf is hierso ontwikkel. Ek gaan soort van my in Afrikaans met hierdie gedeelte, want hierdie hele skyfie is Afrikaans of slide. En dan as ons kyk na gesaaide grane, koring was baie belangrik. Hulle het 1659 het hulle reeds meel begin gebruik. So koring was baie suksesvol ook gewees en meel was die basiese bestanddeel wat hulle in baie goed gebruik het. Aartappels is eers aan die einde van die 17de eeu gewees wat hulle dit begin gebruik het. En dan was daar ook veldkosse wat ek genoem het. So veldkosse was anyswortel, wilde anys en 'n wilde anys was oor die kole gedoen en dit was ook in melk gestowe en met vleis gebruik. En dan die broodboom. Die broodboom, hulle het ook die kern van die broodboom gevat en dan het hulle dit so in melk geweek en hulle het dit gebruik as 'n gis. So hulle het vir die hele ruk so gelos in die melk en dit het basies, en dit het begin gebruik as 'n gis vir brood ook. En dan vis was baie belangrik. Die Hollanders was baie, they were exposed to fish already. En hulle het 'n plaaslike vis gebruik, 'n varswatervis wat hulle seesnoek genoem het. Wat eintlik 'n Hollandse naam is wat hulle van Holland gebring het, maar hulle het hier plaaslik die varsvis gebruik dan en seesnoek genoem. Hulle het vissop gemaak en curryvis. Ons dink ook altyd, jy weet, curryvis is miskien deur Maleisiese goed, maar in Holland was dit al reeds in die 16de eeu wat curryvis soort van ontwikkel en gebruik was. Dan suiwel. 'n Suiwel was baie groot in Jan van Riebeeck se tyd ook. Hulle het eiers, melk en botter het hulle verder ontwikkel. Suiwel was baie groot geweest en botter het hulle in 1655 al gemaak. En dan het ek so 'n bietjie 'n paar ander bestanddele wat ek net speserye wil uitsonder. Tog die speserye wat hier was al reeds en soos borrie en gemmer geweest. En dan wyn vir die 1659 was die eerste wyn gemaak. En koffie en tee was heelwat later. Koffie en tee was in 1676 was koffie en wyn eers werklik waar begin gebruik en ontwikkel. So eintlik as 'n mens kyk oor hierdie hele tydperk van 1652 en jy kyk na wat die basiese bestanddele was, wat nou uitgestaan het, was die vrugte en groente soos ek genoem het, die koring en die vis en suiwel. Suiwel, eiers, melk, botter, hulle het dit baie suksesvol ontwikkel verder. Maar mens kan teruggaan, daar's so baie detail. Toe hulle aangekom het in die Kaap, het hulle maar die eiers begin gebruik van pikkewyne en dit was baie interessant hoe hulle maar die dinge ontwikkel het en met basiese goed baie eintlik vermag het en tog baie gevorder het in daai tyd. So ek gaan voort na die volgende skyfie en dit is die Hugenote spesifieke Hugenote invloed van 1688. Die Hugenote het aangekom in 1688 en hulle het tog maar goed saam met hulle gebring, 'n bietjie meer verfynde goed, waar dit 'n bietjie, ek sê altyd in Jan van Riebeeck se tyd, hulle het soos hierdie peuter of blikborde gebruik, die Frans het ingekom en hulle het die gange, the courses, the starters, the mains, the dessert, they introduced that and left at the bottom there you can see all the fine dining in the way that they would lay out a table and the porselein wat hulle ingebring het, die silwerware wat hulle ingebring het, die koper ook al bo wat in die kombuis al reeds gebruik was. Dit was soort van in daai era gewees wat hulle ingebring het. En daar was natuurlik ook hout wat hulle gebruik het. En basies wat ek daar nog verder kan noem is maar net al die slawe wat hierdie toerusting begin gebruik het, was tog maar mans gewees. So it was the men that actually started with the cooking processes in the kitchens. En dan die ontstaan van boerekos. Boerekos is mos maar 'n term op sy eie. En boerekos is ook, daar word, daar's 'n boek wat ek weet nie of julle weet nie, dit is die geskiedenis van boerekos en dit is deur professor Klaasens van Stellenbosch gedoen. En sy het ook die verwysing, die naam boerekos. Wat is boerekos? So dit is ook maar aan ons, dit word gekoppel aan wat die boere tog maar toe gebruik het in daai tyd, soos biltong, speserye, peper, kruie, mosterd en bitters, rooswater, truksvy, stroop. Ek het daar 'n soort van maar 'n bietjie van die bestanddele uitgelig. En dan, ek dink boerekos soos wat ons like we associate boerekos die naam, is met geregte, soos bobotie en potjiekos. As iemand tog praat van potjiekos of bobotie, dan dit word geassosieer met wat hulle op die plattelande begin gebruik het. Hulle het van soort van Stellenbosch en Drakensberg gebiede, hulle het mos uit begin beweeg en verder platteland toe gegaan. En dit is waar die potjiekosse en die braaivleis en al daai tipe van goed ook maar ontwikkel het. En dit is soos wat ons maar boerekos ken vandag. Daar is tipiese eetes natuurlik wat vleis soos boerekos en dan is daar eetgewoontes soos galopsop wat hulle ook daai tyd gebruik het en wat skynskoek, ek weet nie, skynskoek is ook maar Afrikaanse boereterme en dit is basies 'n gis, soos 'n gis, rolletjies, dit word gepak en dan word dit gesny. Ek weet nie, daar's baie om eintlik te noem op hierdie tyd ook, maar die truksvy-stroop, dit was die Khoisan, die plaaslike mense wat dit begin gebruik het ook. En ek wil hierso ook 'n bietjie noem dat die eerste geskrewe verwysing na Boerekos sê daar 1751 is verwysing van 'n predikant wat in Mamesbury was en hy het aangesterk van 'n siekte en hy het boerekos geëet. Hy het dit verwys daar geskrewe, hy het boerekos in begin eet. So, ek dink ons vryburgers en al die boere, dit is, soos ek sê, al hierdie kosse wat maar tog uitstaan, soos wat ons nog, dit maar steeds vandag, ek dink, as boerekos verwys. Dan gaan ek aan oor die rol van vroue. Die rol van vroue, ek dink, soos ek genoem het, die slawe het maar altyd, het was mans gewees en hulle het alles altyd begin en gekook en so. En die vroue het nooit eintlik erkenning gekry nie. En ek het gekyk na dinge, as ek sê dinge eintlik, ek meen ek het navorsing gaan doen en dan dink ek elke keer, dit kan nie wees nie. 1657, vanaf daar het die vroue slawe, ons het eers daar regtig waar begin feature, wat ons begin status gekry het en wat ons 'n rol begin speel het. En dit is vir my ongelooflik, as jy eintlik dink, hoe lank terug dit net mans was wat gefeature het en basies 1657 het die vrouens eers regtig waar tevore gekom met die rol in die kombuis en meer begin oorneem en meer begin resepte skryf en hulle het handgeskrewe goed geskryf wat hulle basies van ma na dogter oorgedra het en ek gaan net nou kom by resepte en hoe dit meer ook daar gebeur het, maar daar is ook net foto's van soos wat die kombuise daai tyd gelyk het en die foto daar onder is, al hierdie foto's is eintlik geneem by Stellenbosch Museum wat dit heeltemal so oorspronklik uitgelê het daar, soos wat die vure was aan die regterkant daar waar die swart is. Hulle het daar maar vuur gemaak soos 'n vuurherd en daar die kosse daar op so 'n oop kombuis gaar gemaak. As ons dan aangaan op kookboeke, want ek sê altyd, jy weet, kookboeke is vir my belangrik, want dit is maar waar ons alles deel met mekaar en waar dit toch begin het. En dit is baie interessant, die eerste geskrewe manuskripte. As jy nou gaan oplees ook eintlik, wat het hulle saamgebring toe die Hugenote en almal gekom het, basies na die suidpunt hier van Afrika? Die slawe het dinge gedeel, maar hulle het toch goed ingebring. En dit is baie interessant as jy eintlik kyk wat ingebring was. Alles wat ingebring was maar deur die Hollanders ingebring. Daar was eintlik niks deur die Franse ingebring nie. Die Franse het nie een kookboek saam met hulle gebring nie. En omdat die Franse ook, daar was maar min Franse gewees, hulle het al die Hollandse goed oorgeneem basies en die Hollandse boeke en die resepte en goed. Die volmaakte Hollandse keukenmeid, daai boek, is in Holland gedruk en hulle het dit basies saam met hulle gebring. En daar is van daai resepte gebruik. Dan die verstandige kok, dieselfde, 1668, daai boek gedateer. Dit was ook 'n Hollandse boek waarvan hulle resepte gebruik het. En dan die mondprovisieboekie is 1710 en baie interessant, dit is die eerste boek wat in Suid-Afrika geskryf is. En dit was deur Johanna van Riebeeck en dit is Jan van Riebeeck se kleindogter gewees wat die boek geskryf het. En ook van die boek, hulle sê dit was nie, as ek nou so kan verwys, it wasn't a consumer friendly book vir die huisvrouens. Daar's nie vreeslik baie wat hulle blykbaar geniet het van die boek nie. So die boek is nie soort van iets wat uitgestaan het nie. Wat wel uitgestaan het, is die volgende boek, die keukenboek, 1819. En aan die regterkant, jy kan julle sien, die voorkant van die boek, dit is deur 'n weduwee Blankenhof geskryf, en basies was dit soort van die begin van, kan ek sê, 'n merkwaardige boek wat begin gebruik was in daai tyd. So dit is baie interessant, dit is 4 boeke wat alles Hollands was wat in daai tyd gebruik is, en die keukeboek deur Blankenburg die weduwee, dit was die eerste boek wat bietjie meer gesofistikeerd begin raak het, waar hulle soos Sy het eier-wit begin gebruik, opgeklits om dit as rysmiddels te begin gebruik. Dit is soort van, dit het weier gaan die resepte en bestanddele. En dit was ook in daai tyd, daar was nog geen bakpoeier gewees nie, so hulle het nog steeds maniere gekry om gebak te laat rys het. En dan is daar ook die eerste plaaslike gedrukte boekie wat in Natal was in 1870 gewees, wat vir interessantheid is. So ek het daai uitgesonder as die first written manuscripts, dis handgeskrewe boeke gewees. En dan gaan ek aan na die eerste gedrukte boeke, wat vir my ook baie interessant was. Want van hier af het die resepte basies en dink ek het ons kookkuns begin ontwikkel in Suid-Afrika. I should switch over to English maybe for a bit. I hope that you're still with me on this. So the 4 printed recipe book before 1900. And it's quite interesting. This is 4 books that I also focused on, that stood out for me. The Colonial Household Guide by a Housewife of the Colony, 1889. And this was a lady, A.R. Barnes, and she was from Kimberley, and she was English. And then there was the next one is Cook in Resepte boek. Dit was Elizabeth Dykman en dit was in Afrikaans gewees, 1890. Sy is gebore in, hierdie Elizabeth Dykman, sy is gebore in Londen. Sy het as kind Suid-Afrika toe gekom en sy het plaaslik getrou en sy het basies die boek in Afrikaans begin doen en sy het gesê, sy wil begin deel vir Afrikaans ook. En dan Cookery, Simple Yet Distinctive, 1890. Dit was Ellie Hewitt, sy was Engels gewees en sy was van Seepunt. En dan Hilda, Where Is It, 1891, stood out completely. Vandag nog, as jy iewers gaan of as jy na argiewe gaan of na die museums gaan, Hilda, Where Is It, staan uit. Dit is 'n boek wat baie bekend begin raak het in daai tyd. En dit was Hildegard Duckett en sy was van Darling. So ek het al 4 daai boeke vir julle aan die regterkant, die voorblad van die boeke. Maar wat vir my baie interessant hier is ons vorige skyfie, the previous slide showed that it was basically the first handwritten books by Dutch. And then we go to this slide currently where we are, and the first 4 books is basically English. It's the one exception, Cook in Resepte boek, wat Afrikaans. Al die ander is 3 Engelse vrouens. That it's the English that actually took the initiative to start writing and printing the recipe books in English. So that was quite fascinating, and I find it surprising is the word, that it was 3 of the first 4 books to be printed in English. So then we go on to the next slide, and then it's now after 1900, and there is now more recipe books that's now printed. En ek het dit in 3 gedeel, want dit staan uit vir my soos gevestigde boeke wat meer handleidings is, en dan maatskappyboeke en dan ons erfenis. So from 1900, ek dink ons begin meer, we're getting more familiar with these books. Die gevestigde kookboeke, Tafelvreugde, 1918, Prakties kookboek vir Suid-Afrika, 1922, and just look at this, it's all Afrikaans again. Mevrou Sluit se Afrikaanse kookboek, 1923, en die Oranje kook en reseptenboeke voor Suid-Afrika, Lekker Kos, 1931. So dit was weer alles Afrikaans gewees. En die maatskappyboeke, that's quite interesting to me. Davis Guillotine, and I'm sure you must all have a Davis Guillotine book somewhere. I should actually have showed you my little books. I forgot to take it out, but Davis Guillotine printed so many books. but die smaaklike spyse, ook Afrikaans 1922 was the very first company recipe book, and it was in Afrikaans. So royal baking powder came, and then they started English. Anyone can bake, 1928, and I'm sure we all have, there was a few of these royal baking powder books out. So we might also have that as well, because I've got quite a few copies of throughout the years as they reprinted the books. En dan die Departement Landbou, Kos en Kokens, 1933, that was also a very well-known book. En dan die Rade, that was also a category, die Vleisraad, South African Meat Cookbook, 1985. And I worked at the meat board, and one of the books, that book specifically, I was co-author on. We were like, say, 6 home economists that wrote that book. And I'm sure, again, you must all have, there must be some of our members today that have all the boards. There was the Suiwelraad and the Milieraad and al die rade. En ek sê, it was always the good times that we had, because all these companies basically wrote books. So die Vleisraad had a vleisboek, dan is die droë vrugteraad, droë vrugte, en die Milieraad, en so dit aangegaan. And it was fascinating those years also, where I was part of in 1985, where all these company cookbooks were published. En dan ons erfenis, I see this category as Louis Leipold, and I'm sure you all know Louis Leipold and all his books. Louis Leipold, Kos vir die Kenner, that was 1933. De Villiers, Kook en Geniet, we all know about Kook en Geniet. I'm sure if you're English, you must all know Kook en Geniet. 1951 was the first book, and there were so many copies printed. En dan Renata Coetzee, Spyse en Drank, 1977. En then was our Cas Abrams, Culture and Cuisine of the Cape Malays, 1995. So it's quite interesting, all these books. And then going back to, I spoke about one author, De Villiers in Stellenbosch. She wrote this Boerekos book. And in this Boerekos book, she said that the Malay mense, the Malays, had no influence on our Cape culture. And she got a lot of appeal about that, because Malay food, the cuisine Malay, was definitely influenced with all the Malays on our culture as we stand today. So coming back to, also depending who you speak to, there is authors that, like Louis Leipold, that had one view, Cas Abrams another view, Renata Coetzee, she contributed a lot to where we are today. And all her recipe books, most of her equipment and stuff is in the Stellenbosch Museum today. There's a lot to be seen there from Renata Coetzee. So I spent quite a lot of time on this, just to share with you where we are. From now it will go quick. We've got a few, say 15 minutes left. There is a few slides that I will run through. So we get to company, gemeenskapsboek, van die company boeke, gaan ons na community cookbooks. You all know that. Dit is die, ek sê altyd, it's the church book and it's the school little book, and all the people contribute. So they discovered now everyone can contribute, and we can share recipes, and we have a little community cookbook, and we have it as sort of building a wall somewhere. Ek sê altyd, hierdie community cookbooks het al baie kerkbezare en al hierdie goed het al baie toe community bydraes gelewer om goed te gebou het en goed te verander het, waar hulle geld contributions gekry het. So hierdie Paul Cookery boek was ook die 1980, was die eerste boekie wat die Rooi Kruis uitgegee het. En dan is daar 'n foto koekbolletjies wat julle kan sien aan die regterkant. Dit was die eerste foto wat in Huisgenoot gepubliseer was in 1925, wat wys dat daar was al bazaars begin gewees waar hulle koek en melktert en sulke goed begin verkoop het op bazaars. Dan die 5de gedeelte van hierdie is die digitale en ander media, digital and other media. And I'm referring back to Rachel Botha's about this milk tart study. Fascinating, she said to me. So, if you go on Instagram, you go on Facebook, and you go and Google milk tart and melt that, jy Google milk tart op Instagram, en dit gee vir jou 20,600, 20,600 results, just if you Google milk tart. Dan gaan jy melktert en 7,700. And that was the end of 2020 when she finished her study. So it's fascinating that there is, I mean, so many milk tart recipes available and references. So then we go on the fourth and the last section of my talk, and that is the origin and contributors to our food cuisine as we stand today. So where are we today, and who contributed as cuisines? The Dutch, Hollands, and I listed just a few of the actually meals and things as we know. Melktart, koeksisters, sauskleitjies, melksnysels, soetkoekies, hertogkoekies. Hertogkoekies is ook verwys na hertog. Wafels, gestoofde vrugte, it's all the familiar things that we know. Asyn, malva pudding, pastye, bokkoms, boontjie geregte. So that's just a list of where we are today, and the Dutch contributed to this. Dan gaan ek na die Franse. Die Franse het wat hulle ingebring het, soos ek vroeër genoem het, is die gange, which is the fine dining, ooblekies. And amongst all the discoveries that I made is this ooblekies, because I've heard about ooblekies, but when I started with this research last year, I was obsessed to get an ooblekie pan. So I just want to show you the pan there on the left. This is the ooblekie pan. And then if you open it, it's like a scissor thing that you open, that it opens like that. And it's got a pattern. And it's like a thin wafer. And they heated it over fire. It's like flat, and then you roll it up. And on the right is how they served it, with cream and things. Any fillings inside that you want to, but it was originally done with whipped cream. So that's ooblekies. Further, the French didn't really contribute to a lot of dishes, but they influenced the way that we eat. They reduced fat, but yet they added cream again to the meals. The French breads, the fine breads as we know it, and then mousbolletjies, we all know mousbolletjies, the fine rusks, and then confite, which they use the local fruits, and the jams, and then skaapvleis in sauce. So that sort of stood out for me from the French as well. And then we go on to the Dutch. Dutch was very minimalistic. It was maar net boerewors eintlik, the wors wat gekom het van daar, the sausages. But ons het dit plaaslik, obviously met ons speserye en goed, het ons dit plaaslik gemaak en ons het ons eie boerewors vandag. Maar die idee, die concept sausage het van die Duitsers gekom. En dan van die Engelse het ons roast gekry, en wat ons nog steeds vandag gebruik. Alhoewel dit is so minder, ek dink deesdae ook al daar soveel, it's not the Sunday roast as we know it anymore, but still it was influenced by the English. En dan die oosters, die Kaapse Malay, daar's toch baie goed wat daar gekom, die curries, die sambals, die atjars, bladjangs, en dan koesisters, nie koeksisters nie, die koesisters, which is that photo that I've got on. It's the soft like yeast cake. It's like a dough, and it gets dipped into this hot syrup and then coated with coconut. And especially in Western Cape, we all know the koesisters, and then the breedies. The breedies is like poentjie breedie, tomatie breedie, all that, as we know that. En dan gaan ek aan na, ek wil net ooblekie variasies vir julle gewys het. Wat baie interessant was en wat ek uit hierdie hele kan ek sê research myself op uitgekom het, oblietjies het gekom van die Franse. En daar is nog so 'n paar pannetjies hier en daar beskikbaar in ons land. Maar as jy dit gaan begin research, dan kom jy die Italianers noem dit 'n pizzle pan. En dit is hulle panne. En dit lyk maar net soos die oblietjies. Dit word net so opgerol. En as jy dan verder gaan, die Noorweegs noem dit 'n kroemkakepan daaronder. Hulle gooi dit ook so en hulle rol dit op. Die Vietnamese noem dit hulle noem dit ook wafels daar. Die Chinese het dit soos klapperolle. Selfde konsep klapperolle wat hulle so oprol. So eintlik as 'n mens vat met net 'n basiese soos oblietjies, daar is soveel verskillende variasies daarvan. En dit bring my weer terug, as ek weer teruggaan na die melktert wat ek nou verwys. Ons het soort van die melktert hiernatoe gebring en gesê, dit kom van Holland. Maar kyk hoeveel variasies is daar op liedjies. Daar's net so baie variasies op melktert eintlik deur die wêreld. Dit is van die Portugese, dit is van die Franse, wat custard gebruik, die Engelse gebruik vla, en so daar's baie variasies van een ding. So ek gaan ter afsluiting basies net soos noem spesifiek op melktert. Melktert het ons gekry eintlik van die konsep van die Portugese, van UK. It was in the UK, the English used custard, the French used custard. En ons het basies die konsep gebring. Dit het nie van die Hollanders ingekom spesifiek nie. Die idee van vla het ontwikkel en die eiermengsel begin ontwikkel. En ons het dit ontwikkel verder en toe begin kaneel oorgooi. En die kaneel was van die plaaslike Malay gewees. En soos hy vandag staan in melktert, is dit eintlik Suid-Afrikaans. So daar is 'n Filipynse koshistorikus. En wat ek ter afsluiting wil noem weer. Sy's baie groot gewees in die wêreld met haar konsep en research en alles wat sy bygedra het tot die koskultuur. And she said in the Philippines that basically it is such a mix of so many cultures that was brought together. And I can refer to us as South Africans as exactly the same what happened in the Philippines. We were exposed to a few things from the French, a lot from the Dutch, local and all over later. And of all of that, like Doreen said, what happened in the Philippines is what happened here. We were exposed to something. Ons het dit aangeneem. We adopted it. Ons het dit aangepas. We reworked it. En ons het dit ons volks eie gemaak. Daai 3 dinge sonder sy uit. And that is, again, with all our dishes, that is a very typical South African, even Boerekos. We got the concept, we changed it, and now it ons gesê, it's our erfenis, dis ons volks eie. And that's what happened. En vandag waar ons staan, sê ek, ons is 'n ryk kultuur met kos. Dit het uit boeke gekom, dit het uit bestanddele gekom, dit het uit nationalities gekom. Die nationalities, die Hollanders, Fransers, Duitsers, Oosters, soos ek gesê het. And everyone from all over, they brought it from Middle East, they brought it from Indies, die speserye, and they brought it to the southern point of Africa, and to make it our own and our own food culture as we stand today. So that all in all, and that is, I hope that you enjoyed it. And I know there's such a lot to still say about this, but that was just in short to try and capture quite a lot on all different aspects. And thank you very much for listening to me and for your patience. And if there's any questions at this point, I hope to be able to answer.
I've got a 3-in-1 question. I've listened to you very carefully, and I observed that that the history that you are covering focus very much on the colonial start off, and then you veer towards talk a little bit about the French influence, and you mention slave koi in Malay, and the English is just a little dot. So
Yes.
my worry now is, if we have this heritage of cooking, isn't it that we need to build on South African cooking, take our history, but move forward? That is my first question. My second question is, you say that the slave men were the first cookers, and then the women only followed later. Now, my worry is, and my question is, didn't the wives of the slave men cook at all? And what proof is there? And then, yeah, maybe I should just stand on those two. Then, did you know the third one? Did you know that Pienaar, the mission station in the Western Cape, it started in 1843, and they have got a cookbook. Do you know of it, where they have collected the recipes that was over 10 generations that were, because you mentioned Franschhoek, and I was worried, I was wondering whether you know of this book. So these are my three questions. Thank you.
Okay, Eleanor, thanks very much for that. Yes, basically, I spoke a lot about the Dutch that influenced the culture and French, but just to sort of summarize it, when Jan van Riebeeck and where it started as a colony, obviously the Dutch came in, there was the French, the Hugenote that came in, but as I said, the Dutch had a stronger influence on what happened, because they brought the recipe books with them. The French, not a lot. There was no books with. So basically, it was just, they came in as Dutch, and they started with the slaves, just sharing and sharing. And apparently the slaves would later share to the women, and the women would share to their daughters. So it went on. But the cook itself, and that brings me to the second question really, the cook itself was definitely slaves for a long time. The women might have cooked a little bit, but it's not documented that well, because it was always the slaves that got the exposure and the acknowledgement as well. The woman was really pushed out of the kitchen and the whole scene of that very much. They were not. If they cooked at home or so, I don't think it was documented well, because, for instance, Jan van Riebeeck, the colonies, there was the slaves that started the cooking. There was apparently 2 slaves, and then it grew, and then it became more, and it was all definitely men. So coming with the influence, and you know, there's a lot said in de Villiers' book. She has got it detailed about all these Dutch influences, and her whole book is all with the Dutch influences and the slaves. And the women, as I said, was really pushed out completely out of this thing. They were just not, they didn't feature. A woman meant nothing in the kitchen at that. It's strange to me to understand as well. And I also asked Rachel about this, because she went into detail about this. And then coming to the recipe book with you, I'm not aware of the book. There is a lot of books that's compiled. I only shared the highlights of the books as I saw it, as the most important influences. But there is definitely, Louis Leipold also talked about in Natal, KwaZulu-Natal region, where they started doing combining recipe books from the community. So there must be a lot of books out there, but about the documentation of that, what I could find is what I gave there. You know, the Paul cookbook that started, and it was a Roy Grace book, but I'm not aware of the Franz Hoek one. But Franz Hoek, I mean, there is a lot of people that still have old books that's documented somewhere. I don't know if it's shared a lot, but there might be a lot of hidden stuff, Eleanor, that, you know, I'm not aware of.